Such was the popularity and perceived power of Tonight that the BBC took it off the air for the duration of the 1959 election campaign. Good ideas, though, are hard to kill. One young Labour politician, then calling himself Anthony Wedgwood Benn, recognised the advantages of the Tonight format in getting a message across to a wide audience. Benn set about creating a deliberate imitation of Tonight with himself as the Cliff Mitchellmore figure. He even approached the BBC to second Tonight's deputy editor, Alistair Milne, as an advisor. The BBC placed Milne at the disposal of the Labour Party, but made it clear that he continued to have other responsibilities, not least the election night results programme itself. After the almost laughably forced discussion of the first Conservative broadcast, Labour had the opportunity to do something different, and the Tonight formula fitted the bill. "Labour hits television jackpot," ran a Daily Mirror headline. The paper said the broadcast moved so fast, so topically and so entertainingly that many viewers probably forgot they were being appealed to as voters. With their carefully designed sets, scripts and confident presentation, Labour's broadcasts were far more slick than their rivals' films. The New Statesman said Labour's team came over not as politicians but as broadcasters. Here's Tony Benn and his team at Labour's Television and Radio Operations Room, better known as Lime Grove Studios.
An election broadcast on behalf of the Labour Party.
This is our television operations room. Throughout the campaign, the leaders of the Labour Party will be speaking directly from here. We've got a sort of permanent staff here. Christopher Mayhew is looking after facts and figures. When there's any interviewing to be done, the questions will be put by Woodrow Wyatt, and I'm going to give some of the news of the campaign. Britain Belongs to You will be on the air in this form 12 times between now and polling day, on sound and BBC and independent television. Tonight, Hugh Gaitskell is here to open our campaign. Tomorrow he sets off on his national tour, and in future programmes we'll be linking up with him from other cities in Great Britain.
Good evening. The most important thing that's happening in the world just at the moment is not Mr. Jasper and his companies, but Mr. Khrushchev's visit to the United States. I don't think we should be too depressed by the rows that we keep hearing about. When we came back from the Soviet Union about 10 days or a fortnight ago, I gave an account of our meeting with Mr. Khrushchev, and I said then that we'd had a pretty rough time. But I also said that after the storm there was sunshine. Mr. Khrushchev is the sort of man, I think, who's rather liable to fly off the handle, but after a bit, when he's had his say, then we found at any rate he was perfectly reasonable and willing and ready to talk seriously about quite important international issues. Mind you, I don't think it's a very good plan to try and convert him publicly into being a parliamentary democrat. The truth is that the difference between the Soviet Union and the West on issues of this kind is so great that it simply cannot be bridged at the moment. I hope that in time, as more visits take place, as we come to know each other better, there will be better understanding in this field. But at present, if you start by a frontal attack, well, you're almost bound to run into trouble. Now, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that we need despair or that we need assume that the Russians aren't willing to make settlements. I think they draw a distinction between the fundamental issues of the communist dogma and settling international disputes. And I believe that they want to settle these disputes so long as they don't feel they're going to be at a disadvantage in the outcome. And we found, when we were talking to them, as I mentioned the other day, that there were at any rate 4 areas where we thought we could get agreement. Now, I think there's another important point to be borne in mind, and that is that you should start with the areas where you're most likely to get agreement and not where there's most disagreement. And anyway, that's how I would handle it. And it leads me on to say something about Mr. Khrushchev's speech on disarmament. Now, personally, I think it was an enormous pity that the West did not welcome this much more warmly and immediately than they have done. After all, scrapping the lot, getting rid of all the arms everywhere, so long as it is all the arms everywhere and with proper controls, is surely something we should always welcome and all welcome. If you say, well, it's just propaganda, I would say the best thing then is to test it out. And it'll be exposed if it is propaganda, and if it isn't, then we shall get somewhere. Now, on the home front, personally, I think the most important issue, perhaps of all in this election, is what we're going to do for and about the old people, the retired people, both now and in the future. There's a tremendous challenge to face there, and our community, all of us, have got to face it. Well, there are rival schemes in the field, and you'll hear about ours a little later on tonight. So I won't talk any further just now on that subject. I'd like to leave you, if I may, with one last thought on quite a different theme. During the election, you've already heard a great deal about the issues and policies, and also about the leading personalities. But they're not the only things that matter. Perhaps what matters even more is the kind of people we are.
The best thing about politics is the people you work with. The Labour Party has an immense variety of members, as you'll see from this film which we made just before Parliament was dissolved.
Tom Fraser on the right here was the first man to go straight into Parliament from the pits. He's a Scotsman. His father and grandfather were miners before him.
I am one of about 40 miners in Parliament, all Labour. You mustn't think, however, that miners in Parliament are concerned only with mining matters. Take me, for example. I have been principally interested in Parliament in Scottish affairs, Scottish education, housing and health, agriculture and the like. It would be important, however, it is important, to maintain in Parliament a large number of people from industry, from mining and other industry.
Eirene White has been out shopping. She's a working housewife and one of the party's specialists on housewives and consumers' problems. She's MP for Flint.
It's difficult enough for any woman to run a home and have a job as well, but I think it's even more difficult perhaps for members of Parliament. But there are a good many of us on our side in the House of Commons who take a very keen interest in housewives' affairs. There's Jean Mann, for example, and Harriet Slater, and Elaine Burton, and myself and several others. And we're constantly asking questions about the cost of living, about value for money, about keeping up standards and quality for the housewives. We're particularly anxious that housewives should not be misled by manufacturers or advertisers. Now, there are one or two women on the other side of the House, among the Conservatives, who must be housewives, but we never hear the housewives' voice from their side of the House of Commons. I don't know why it is, but they never speak up on the housewives' problems in the way that we do.
Denis Howell, member for All Saints Birmingham, is a professional football referee and has been 10 years on the Birmingham City Council.
The great majority of Acts of Parliament have got to be administered by local councils. So it really is important to have in Parliament men and women with first-hand experience of administering such public services as education, health, housing, recreational facilities and so on. The Labour Party are very fortunate to have a rich experience on their benches, members who've gained first-hand knowledge of these subjects. On the other hand, the Tories have very few members on their benches with local government experience.
And this is Mrs. Bessie Braddock, Member of Parliament for the Exchange Division of Liverpool.
I know that I can represent the ordinary people. We need more people in the House of Commons who can express the working class point of view. I left school when I was 14, but if I may say so, I can put a case very much better than many of those who had a public school or a university education. Because people will come and talk to me, express their difficulties, and know that I will understand.
Bringing the sheep home with his son and dogs is Cliff Kenyon, member for Chorley. He owns several hill farms like this one.
Just like a lot of Tories, those sheep wouldn't get a move on. In the House, we'll represent the large farmer, the small farmer, and the agricultural worker, so that whatever question arises on agriculture, we can deal with it in a practical way.
Group Captain Wilcock is chairman and managing director of 4 aviation companies. He flew planes earlier than anyone else in the House. He's an engineer, a Lloyd's underwriter, and a member of Parliament for Derby.
Businessmen, like myself, can contribute a good deal, but it needs a mixture in Parliament to achieve a proper balance, and that's what we've got in the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Of course, you may have noticed a staggering variety in the Conservative Party too. Vicky, the famous Evening Standard cartoonist, shows it like this. You may have seen that cartoon when it first appeared in the Daily Mirror. But of course, politics is not a question of personalities, it's a question of issues. And as Hugh Gaitskell said, in this campaign, we are doing something of a crusade on pensions on behalf of the old folk. Here is our report.
Kingston-on-Thames, the constituency, until Parliament was dissolved, of the Conservative Minister of Pensions. Compare the posters with the pensioners.
Well, we had the National Assistance Board man come to the house, and he wanted to know the ins and outs, where I got any money in the bank, and what I got off of the council, all that. And we told him the truth, and we didn't tell no lie. And he said, well, they can't do anything for you. He said, the only thing, he said, you're having a shilling over your odds. I said, well, get outside. That was the words I said to him. I said, I don't want to see you. And he never, and when he sees me now, he's like that, and I give him the same.
I pay for my room. I pay my daughter what she charges me for my food and things like that. And do you know what? When I was so ill the other week, the doctor said to me, Mrs. Lavender, you should have a nice Guinness night and morning. I said, yes, doctor, you give me the money. I said, and then I'll get it.
You see, some old people, when they're getting on, they want quite a lot of things from a chemist, and it's a shilling every item. One old dear I know has to pay 5 shillings every week for things. Luckily she's on national assistance, she can get it back. But the point about it, even that, is that they haven't always got 5 shillings at the time, because they've got to pay for it and then draw it afterwards.
There are 120,000 more old people on national assistance today, after 8 years of Tory ministers of pensions. The Tories forget the old people. Labour thinks the pension should be raised by 10 shillings. And here is what some pensioners would do with it.
Well, I think I should buy a bit more food, something a bit more nourishing. You see, now we have to think of all the cheapest things that you can get. Some of them, they say, are just as nourishing as the others, but then you see they want a lot more cooking, so by the time you've wasted a bit more on electricity or gas, well, you're nothing in, are you?
Well, I buy my wife some underclothing, a petticoat or something like that.
I must have a new chair, because I cannot walk, and I've got to have one to go out in, because the old one has collapsed on me several times.
which will cost me 7 sevenpence a week.
Well, I should start. Go out and buy my new cap, new collars, a flashy tie, and something nice to eat.
If I got another 10 shillings a week, I should spend it on coal. That's what I should do with it. Couldn't do with anything else with it, only coal. Because it's just the coal that is the worst in the winter time.
The architect of Labour's new pension plan is Richard Crossman. He's with us here tonight.
Dick, what were the basic things you were trying to achieve with our superannuation scheme?
Well, first, of course, to help the present pensioners. 1 million on national assistance. Another 500,000 entitled to it but too proud to take it, and roughly half the rest just on the poverty level. Now, we think the minimum we can do is the 10-shilling increase. We're going to add to it an automatic annual adjustment to cover any rise in prices.
But who exactly is eligible for the extra 10 shillings?
Oh, it isn't only the old age pensioners. It also covers sickness benefit, widow's benefit, and unemployment benefit. And in addition, we're going to make a very big increase in national assistance, but the exact amount is something which we'll have to leave till we get there.
Well, now that's immediate rescue action. What about the long term?
Well, our aim is to see that everyone gets all the advantages of a very good private superannuation scheme. Now, we do that by allowing those in schemes already to contract out. They won't be affected. But everybody else will join national superannuation, and in future they'll be entitled to, first of all, their flat rate pension, and then on top of it, a superannuation pension.
Well, how's it going to be financed?
By contributions. We shall pay 3% of our earnings, the employer will pay 5%, and the state will add a grant of equivalent to 2% of the average national wages. And with that, we shall put that all into a fund, and it'll be sufficient to give, on an average, half pay on retirement, and the surplus of the fund will be invested by independent trustees in order to enable us to pay out higher pensions.
Well, what about this bit about the pensions going up in value as the years go by?
Well, partly that's because we're investing the fund wisely. And secondly, we have what we call our built-in elevator, which ensures that the pension rises automatically through your working life at the same pace as wages.
But then does that mean, then, that our scheme is really definitely better than the Tory scheme?
Well, it's completely different because, frankly, ours is a genuine superannuation scheme and theirs isn't. Let me give you just one example. You know that under the Tory scheme, only 1/3 of the combined graded contribution comes back to you in benefit. The rest is collared by the Chancellor and used for other purposes. You know, if a private employer were to try a fast one like that on a private scheme, he might find himself in jail.
Now for a practical example of how the Labour scheme differs from the Tory scheme.
Well, here's a perfectly typical case. A man of 30 who's earning £13 a week. Now, under the Tory scheme, he pays in contributions 11 and 9. Under the Labour scheme, a little more, 13 and 2pence. But look at the difference in pensions. The Tory pension, £3.10 only. The Labour pension, £5, 19 and 7. And that's not the end of the story, because you've got what Richard Crossman called the built-in elevator. We can expect the national income to rise during this man's working life, and his earnings to rise with them. And if we assume just a 2% annual increase in his earnings, then the Tory pension rises only to £3, 19 and 6, whereas the Labour pension rises to £11, 14 and 5 pence. Now, whether you're married or single, whether you're a man or a woman, young or old, and whatever you earn, you do better under the Labour scheme than under the Tory scheme.
Why haven't the pensioners had the square deal they deserve? They know, as well as you and I do, that there's plenty of money for other government departments. In fact, they've got enough to throw it all over the place.
Instead of building 18 hospitals, the Conservative government spent £33 million on the Supermarine Swift aircraft. The only difficulty was that it didn't fly well enough to warrant producing the aircraft. But the Hunter aircraft, which also cost millions of pounds, did in fact fly. But when it flew at its proper speed and the guns were fired, the engine stopped. When this was cured, it was found that firing the guns cracked the gun mountings. Mind you, now, millions of pounds later, it works.
Well, that's one good reason for voting Labour, but in these programmes, we want to know why you're voting Labour in this election. Write on a postcard to Hugh Gaitskell, Labour Party, London SW1, your reason for supporting the Labour Party in this election. We shall want to use the best answers in these programmes. There are no prizes except the return of a Labour government on October the 9th. Now, this is not a television election. It depends upon the work done in the country, the doorsteps, the factory gates, and in the streets. And I want to bring you now news of some of the movements of the Labour leaders in the next few days. First of all, Hugh Gaitskell himself, who opens the campaign in Bristol tomorrow night. Nye Bevan is in Essex at Chigwell and Hornchurch. Jim Griffiths is at Camberwell and Lewisham. Harold Wilson is at Huyton, all tomorrow, and Barbara Castle is at Blackburn. Now, to finish the programme, as always, with a question to which you are entitled to an answer. Because, remember, Britain belongs to you.
Will the Conservatives give a pledge that if elected, they will at once increase the old age pension by 10 shillings a week before reducing taxation for anyone else?
What do you want if you don't want money? What do you want if you don't want gold? Say what you want and I'll give it you, darling. Wish you wanted my love, baby.